Achieving fearless success and high-performing teams are just some of the things which leaders dream of. These aspects of leading an organization make every second of being a leader both rewarding and challenging at the same time. However, there are some organizations out there which simply force their members to rise above the rest, force them to increase their capacity by 300% without sympathy, and they strive to improve themselves every single day. Today, my guest John Foley and I discuss the basis of his system for creating high-performance teams, why beliefs are so important in creating high-performance teams, why briefing your team is so crucial to success, how to get teams to commit to vision and the plan, amongst many other topics. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 82, Achieving Fearless Success with former lead solo Blue Angel pilot John Foley. Welcome one and welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. And you know what? It's great to have you here. It's great to have you here. Why? Because it's another amazing episode with another world-class guest here for you, the aspiring leader, right? Maybe you're that person who's thinking about starting in your leadership journey. Maybe you're already in a leadership position and you want to hone your skills. Regardless, I'm here, my guests are here for you, to help you. And we're also here to rid the world of those evil bosses out there. You know who I'm talking about. Those people who aren't leaders. We know they're not leaders, but instead, we need leaders. The world today needs leaders. They need people who will stand up, empower their people, and drive organizations harder forward to achieve whatever it is that your organization is meant to achieve. And I'm here to help you do just that. Before I dive into today's guest, just wanted to quickly talk to you and give you a heads up. We're only a few days away from the Moving Forward Leadership Power Goals program going to its full price. So if you've been sitting on the fence, it is now time to make that decision. It is time for you to decide if you're ready to invest in yourself to start achieving the goals that you've always been putting off, that you just don't seem to have time for or don't know how to go about achieving. The Power Goals program is here for you, and I'm here for you. You're going to be brought through this program. It's simple. You're going to figure out what ones are right for you. You're going to figure out how to achieve them. You're going to figure out how to plan properly. You're going to figure out how to execute and stay on track and reflect. All those things which are crucial to goal achievement. Not just setting. Setting is just the beginning, but goal achievement we're talking about here, folks. So if you're interested, go to movingforwardleadership.com/power. Okay, that's movingforwardleadership.com/power. Check out the program. If you got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me at scott@movingforwardleadership.com. And I hope, or I know, I'll see you there getting ready. And in fact, beginning to kick ass and take names. All right. So John Foley, let's talk a bit about the guest today. He's a leadership keynote speaker who inspires audiences with his energy and his commitment to serving others. And you get that from his past life in serving the U.S. Navy as a fighter pilot. He also provides a unique leadership framework that makes trust, teamwork, and high performance possible for anyone in any organization. Former F/A-18 Hornet fighter pilot, former lead solo Blue Angel performance pilot. To say he knows a thing or two regarding performance under pressure, building high performance teams, or achieving success would be a gross understatement, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, you better buckle in because you're about to take a ride. If you've been listening to the show for quite some time or you're caught up on the show, this episode is right up there with my episode with former U.S. Navy SEAL Mark Devine, okay? It's that good. So you better sit back, buckle yourself in, get ready, because you're about to be taken on a ride with a former fighter pilot. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with John Foley talking about achieving fearless success. John, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. Great to have you here.
God, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
For the audience out there, you got the ex-Navy Blue Angel. Like, this is awesome. So when I first got the email saying, hey, do you want to check out this book? And then as I browsed through it, I was like, holy cow, former U.S. Navy, not only like a fellow brother in arms, but a former fighter pilot and a former Blue Angel. So this is going to be a good show. We're going to be able to talk some talk here.
Absolutely. Hey, I flew with the Snowbirds, by the way.
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we used to do exchange events, and I got to fly in the right seat of one of the airplanes. It was a blast.
Yeah, the 155 Tudors.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's neat. So before we get too deep in the show, one of the things I like to get all my guests to do is just give a quick, history, background, summary of themselves, who they are, where they got to, where they came from to get to where they are today, but probably not go too deep because we're going to dive into a few stories that you got in your book there because there's a couple things I want to dig at a little bit more detail for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I was actually born in Germany and my dad was an Army officer. So hoorah, thinking about the connection. Loved my dad, wanted to grow up just like him, so I thought that's what I was going to be. And then, no kidding, Scott, I went to an air show. I was 12 years old. I look up in the sky. I see these 6 magnificent blue jets. I turned to my dad that day and said, Dad, I'm going to do that. 12-year-old kid. Yeah. And it was a journey like all of us, a lot of obstacles. Eventually, went to Annapolis, flew jets off aircraft carriers, flew in the movie Top Gun. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah, I've seen that once or twice.
Yeah, so I got to actually do some of the real flying there. And then flew with the Blue Angels, which we're going to talk a lot about. After that, though, I reinvented myself. Ended up going to Stanford Business School and worked in venture capital in Silicon Valley and started a company in 2003. And since then, have had the rare privilege to speak to over 1,000 organizations all around the world about high-performance teams and how to turn them into business results and leadership. So looking forward to integrating with your audience.
That's great. So just boomerang back to the whole air show thing. I have a soon-to-be 4-year-old.
Nice.
Ethan. And last summer, the Snowbirds were actually here in Kingston, and I was taking him to see the Snowbirds. And there's a part of Kingston as you go through downtown, you're at the peak, the top of the hill, and you're going down. And
oh, nice.
He had taken his nap a bit long that day, of course, right? Because we had plans. And as we're going down the hill through downtown, the Snowbirds started flying above. So we have a Ford Edge with one of those panoramic sunroofs. So I literally opened up the whole roof for him, and he looked up. I think he's going to follow your footsteps.
Nice.
Because since then, that kid is absolutely just all about airplanes. Airplanes. So he'll like, look, Dad, airplane, plane. And he can tell the difference between a plane and a jet.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So
at 4 years old. I love it.
Not even four.
Wow.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. So very similar to you.
Are where you were on top of a hill where we come right over, low to the ground.
Oh, yeah. They just screeched right over. And then at the end of that show, they brought in a Canadian F-18, and we watched that too.
Yes.
Of course, right? So we watched that. So super neat parallels, and similar to you, I actually, I wasn't probably much older than 12. I got a presentation about the Royal Military College when I was in grade 9, and then same thing. I was like, that's where I'm going.
Nice.
I didn't apply to a single school other than RMC and got into RMC. So
congratulations. No backup plan though. I hope you've learned since then.
Young and naive at 18, right? But The first story I want to dive into that was in the book here was when you graduated from Annapolis, you weren't slated to go for F-18s right away. Right. As you got through the flight school. Can you actually expand on that? Because I thought that was awesome what you did there.
Yeah, well, it's like any of us in life. There's obstacles and barriers. When I got out of the academy, got into flight school, and it takes about 2 years, and I actually finished number 1. And normally, the person who finishes number 1 gets to pick what airplane they want to fly. But in this case, the F-18 was too new. This was back in let's see, 84 is when I got my wings. So I had put in a request for the F-18s, and they had rejected me. They basically said, we're only transitioning F4 pilots, and, you're just too young. You can't do this. And I started thinking to myself going, well, wait a minute, there's got to be a way to get in. So I picked up the phone and called the Pentagon. And chain of command. You're not supposed to necessarily do this, but I said, what the heck? And I got through the whole switchboard. I ended up getting the head of aviation detailing, which is who assigns the real pilots. I'm not talking about student pilots. They assign, guys going to Top Gun and that kind of stuff. And I get him on the phone. His name's Captain Rude. And I said, Captain Rude, send some Foley. I really want to fly F-18s. I'll do anything. I'll sweep the floors. I'll clean the bathroom. Just give me a chance. And he goes, well, slow down. Who are you and how'd you get this number? And then I remember him saying, I'll check it. I'll check on it. I'll get back to you. And he hung up the phone. And I'm thinking, well, I'll never hear from him. The next day, I'm in the ready room. The phone rings. Duty officer goes, Foley, Pentagon. I pick up the phone. It's Captain Root. It's a leader who did what he or she said. He got back to me, and basically he mentored me. What he said was this. He said, first off, Ensign Foley, no one in my 3 years of being in the Pentagon, no student has ever called. You're the first one. And because you asked, I'm going to give you something. So I'm thinking this is great, right? He turns around and he says, those F-18 orders, you can't have them. You're too young. You're too inexperienced. But then he mentored me, and he said, if I were you, here's what I would do. I wouldn't fly the F-14, fancy cool jet, making the movie Top Gun, which by the way, I did get a chance to fly later on. But he said, I'd take this airplane called the A-7. Now it's ugly. It's underpowered. No one's going to want it. But get yourself assigned to the USS Midway. It's forward deployed in Japan. Those A-7 squadrons will be in F-18s in 6 months. And you know how the military is, inside information. I'll be in F-18s faster than anybody else. So that was my game plan, but it still didn't work out.
No. I thought that was an amazing story. I actually started cracking up laughing when I read that you had called the Pentagon direct. My wife looked at me and she's like, "What are you laughing at?" And I explained, and she got it too, because actually my wife is military as well. So yeah, we're a military couple. So it's for the audience out there who have no military background, that's like unheard of a brand new person calling up a four-ringer, so a full captain, and saying, "Hey, check it out." Like, you might as well be the person in the mail room calling up the CEO of Fiat Chrysler or something like that, right? Like, it's around the same level.
Yeah, but I think the lesson for the listeners is, and you don't do that all the time, right? That's the only one time I did that. When it really is important to you. I don't take no for an answer. No just means, well, there's got to be another way to get there, right? Mm-hmm. And being smart about it too is important. But this idea of looking at other options out there, and picking up the phone and asking people for their advice, because that's really what I was doing. I was asking him for his advice, and it's amazing how real leaders will take that time. They will share with you what's worked for them. It's powerful.
Yeah, my whole tagline for moving forward leadership is stop bossing, start leading, and that's what I felt out of that story, was that the captain had two options, right? He could have chewed you out hard on that phone right away, and you could have almost sent you packing your bags, or he could have did what he did, which I thought was fantastic. You don't hear about that often, which is sad almost, because too many people are out there just like too worried about all the red tape or chain of command. Boys just taking time saying, no, you did the right thing, tell you, no, you're not getting what you want, but this is how, if you work hard, you can get it. So I thought it was great.
Well, ironic how life works. He ended up becoming the CEO of the Blue Angels a few years later. And I didn't know this at the time, and when I ended up applying for the Blues for the first time, he was the commanding officer, and we met again, and he remembered my initiative, which was good. And then the following, and I didn't get hired that year. It took me a second year, but I was just at an event, speaking at a corporate event here, which I do about 100 a year, and somebody comes up to me and showed me a picture and said, Captain Rude, he's my neighbor. And sure enough, we were able to exchange hellos again after all this time, just a week ago.
That's amazing. Wow. But you kind of hit at something where I wanted the shape and head towards, and that was you hinted that you didn't make the Angels the first time that you applied. But you're a tenacious guy, man. I gotta give you. Like, we're kind of similar. When we know we want something, there's not much stopping us. So can you explain that a bit more and how you ensure that you achieve success that way?
Yeah, well, again, I think it's about not giving up. But I, in the book, I talk about have a clear vision, right? What's your vision? Where you're trying to go, right? I like to call it the high performance zone, which is be very clear on where you're trying to go, assess where you are, and then the gap is between where you are and where you're trying to go, your current state and your future state. And so the book's really about how do you close the gap, right? But the idea there was, I always wanted to be a Blue, and I knew it doesn't just happen. Right. So I applied early on. I was deployed on the aircraft carrier Enterprise. We're out overseas at the time. And I put in my application process, and you got to get a letter from your commanding officer, a letter of recommendation. Right. Well, my commanding officer was all set to write it until I'm on a sortie and I accidentally shoot a missile by mistake. Right. I mean, this is not a nice thing. It's a big deal, right? And so I could tell you're laughing, and so I'm like, wait, come back, and fortunately it didn't hit anybody. It was in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but it was my mistake. And it was a switchology error, but not only switchology, it was, they grounded me. We had an investigation. I said, hey, I blew it. I said, this is what happened, and, straightforward. And it took me a while, but it took about 3 days to learn that the real root cause was not a switchology error. It wasn't not doing my checklist correctly. What it was complacency. See, I'd gotten too comfortable doing something I shouldn't be comfortable. I don't know, the first time I carried live ordnance, man, little hairs were standing up back my neck, and I'd gotten too comfortable at it. So I learned a good lesson from that, but I didn't get a letter of recommendation. My skipper's like, no way, right? So I had to, actually became an instructor pilot in the F-18. They said, why don't we give you an airplane that's supposed to do what you would like to do? And so became an instructor pilot and was flying with the Marines out of El Toro. And it took me a while, but I established myself and then put in another application a year later and did get selected.
No, it's a great story and a lot of great lessons out of that, right? I was laughing because I was just thinking of for an Army guy, that's an epic negligent discharge.
Right. Right.
I deal with 5.56 millimeter bullets, and you're talking about 1,000-pound, missile. So
luckily it was a heat-seeking one. It went towards the sun and didn't hit anybody. So that's
yeah, for sure. Oh man, but mistakes happen, and the most important thing is, like you said, you reflect on it and learn from it. All right, so let's dive into some serious meat of the book here, and you have your system for developing high performance teams. Where did that, come from? What's the basis of it before we get into the system of it itself?
Yeah, it actually was post-Navy career. So, after I was on the Blues, went back to flying jets off the aircraft carriers in a leadership role. And then, I wanted to reinvent myself. And so I ended up using school as that bridge. I ended up, like I said, going to Stanford's business school. And I was then all of a sudden exposed to a whole different world that I didn't really know very well. That's the world of entrepreneurialism, the world of investments. And this was the epicenter. This is 1997, 1998 in Silicon Valley. I mean, stuff was happening, and I just happened to be there. Eventually then went into venture capital and got to work there for a little while, and then started some of my own companies. And to be around that area and to feel that energy was just incredible. So the way that I remember it happened was I was at an event on personal growth. I'm always trying to get better myself. And the person who was speaking said, hey, we got a special guest here, because I had done a video of the Blue Angels when I was on the team about visualization and focus. And he said, could you talk about it? And instead of talking about it from an academic standpoint, I talked about it from a first person account. This is how we used it, and this is how you can turn it into results. And it was a light bulb moment, right? high performance teams, how to turn in business results, leadership, entrepreneurialism. And I thought back to, I just reverse engineered. I said, wait a minute, I've been part of some incredible high performance teams, been through Stanford and strategic management theory and all that stuff. And what is it that works and what doesn't? Because you got to know what doesn't work too. And I remember in strategic management theory, the old axiom, and we all know this: vision, plan, execute, feedback loop. What's the vision? Come up with a plan, execute on the plan. Hopefully you have a feedback loop. And by the way, most people are very weak at this. Okay. In the military, we call it briefs and debriefs, right? And so I said, well, what's the, but that's okay. That's what I call the 1%ers do that. It's called operational excellence. But what do the elite of the elite do? And we do it differently. We think differently, we act differently, we speak differently. And there were some subtleties there. So I reflected back to what worked on the Blues and then have put it through 1,000 companies. And I've come up with this system that works in any industry at any time to sustain excellence under change. And that's what we have here in Fearless Success.
And one of the great points that I like about it, it's simple.
Yeah.
It is simple, and that's great because reality is today, no one has time for complex systems. And I use this example all the time, is that the world can change by the time we are done this podcast interview. And no one has time for a complex system. It's gotta be quick. It has to be enough flexibility in it so that allow for those changes, allow for those adjustments. And, if you start off at step one, you know what? You can adjust on the fly. And
yes.
I think that's huge today. I think it's absolutely crucial today. The world changes so fast that you have to have that ability and that flexibility to adjust on the fly. So that's one of the great points I liked about it. So you got the first step, which is belief.
Right.
So let's dive into that. What does belief mean to you in this system?
Yeah, for me, it's not about vision. So, I think vision's important. Everyone needs to have a vision. The companies have a vision. That's fine. That's fundamental stuff. What I've noticed is the difference is beliefs. You got to get people committed and bought into a vision. See, that's the key. That's the role of a leader. How do you get commitment and buy-in to a vision? So that's what I talk about first. And it turns out there's a lot of neuroscience that supports this. There's cognitive psychology says human beings, you and I, we don't perform at our full potential. What we actually perform at is a belief level. So if you're able to elevate your belief level, watch, your performance will increase. But a team, if you can increase their beliefs, or an organization, maybe just quite possibly a 4-year-old child's belief, success will happen. And once I heard that, because that's an academic principle, you can research that. And I said, that makes intellectual sense. But when did I feel it? When did it become real? And I started thinking about in my life, there's been many times where I have to raise my beliefs. And that's the key.
Yeah, there's a few different things in my mind there. And it goes to that saying where you're the average of the sum of the 5 people you hang out the most with, right?
Yeah,
and
like that.
It's very similar. And I think you actually even use a similar example in the book where you were talking about if you are with someone who you think are below you, you're actually going to regress down to their level. But if you hang out with people who perform at a higher level than you, you're actually going to get pulled up towards that. And I like the belief part of being the foundation. I just actually recently released my first online program, which is a goal setting program. Great. And that's actually the first part and what I believe is that people don't achieve their goals because they actually don't align with their beliefs and values. So values, but it's still, your beliefs and values very similar, fine line between the two of them. But if someone doesn't value something, why are they going to achieve that goal if it's not in line with their values? It doesn't make any sense, right? And it's the exact same thing for belief and vision. If people don't believe in the vision, it ain't going to happen.
Exactly. Well, in the book, there's a story that I think we should talk about here real quick, and that is when you make it real, right? So, you want to raise your beliefs and, and the values. And I started thinking to myself, okay, well, when did I really have to step up? And there was many times. And as you know, in high performance teams, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, whether it's in the military, you are the people you surround yourself with. And you change the conditions. where, the elements, the challenges, and you got to rise to that occasion, right? Now you got to have a support system around you to make that happen too. But my point is, I show up on the Blues. All right. So this is crazy. First day I show up, I got selected and I'm sitting in the briefing room. And the boss says, "Hey, Gucci, you want to go flying today?" Now, he didn't mean fly the airplane. He meant they're going to give me a ride. We have a 2-seater, right? So I jump in the back seat, and we're at an air show. We're taxiing out. And, when you're around greatness, you can just feel it. There was different. Something's different in the air. Little hairs are standing out back of my neck. We taxi out on the runway with 4 jets, and the wings are overlapped for takeoff, right? All of a sudden, the boss says, run them up. So you take the throttles, run with full military power. That's 128,000 pounds of thrust, more horsepower than the whole starting lineup of Indy, by the way, which was just run. Okay. And I worked with Roger on his teams at Indy, but the airplane's shaking, right? And all of a sudden, the boss goes, "Off brakes now, burners ready now, full afterburner." We leap off the runway. Pilot does this violent left wing down. We go slicing underneath the wingtip number 2 jet. Next thing I know, we're tucked in underneath the afterburners of the boss. You know how loud those jets are when they go overhead, right? So the flames are coming out. The airplane's shaking. There's metal all around me. These guys start going straight up. My eyes get this big. And the thought that hit me, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? See, what the Blue Angels were saying that day was, John Foley, you want to play in this game? You need to raise your performance 300%. And you got 3 months to do it, because that's the training cycle of a Blue Angel. And I didn't make up those numbers. 300% comes from this. Closest I've flown a jet to another jet prior to that moment was about 10 feet. Happened in the movie Top Gun, right? Because most pilots never fly formation periods. Sometimes the military fly formation, but you keep it wide apart. But pilots would like to look good, right? So come over the field, you tuck it in about 10 feet, and you hold it straight and level for about 45 seconds. Why? It's hard. Here's a group, here's a team, here's an organization that says, no, that's not good enough. We fly at 36 inches. We get down to 18 inches. We do aerobatics low to the ground. 300% improvement over the best I've ever done. Now, guess what? 3 months later, having put through that process, I was there. But here's the cool part. It wasn't just me. We do it with 3 new pilots every year. It's repeatable, it's transferable, it works. And then I've learned to transfer that into the real world.
It all goes back to what you were saying, though, the belief, right? You had to believe it was possible that you could achieve it. It's like the 4-minute mile. People for the longest time didn't believe it was possible. Couldn't be done.
Exactly. Then,
guy goes out, breaks it, and all of a sudden everybody else is following the shoes.
Exactly. So beliefs are so powerful. You're dead on, But I will say this, with just a belief is not enough, right? You need a plan. You need a strategy.
100%.
And you got to go out there and do it.
That's right. So how did we go about doing that and, moving forward and getting that strategy, getting that plan?
Yeah, well, so that's the second step in the framework. And, for your audience, they can't see that, but in the back of the book, you saw that there's 4 diamonds there. There are facets that form this framework. It starts with beliefs. The second is the brief. Now, I call it the brief because it's not about planning at this stage. So you should have a plan. You should come up with a plan. But what I'm talking about here is focus, because I think that's the key. So beliefs are important. Now you better learn how to focus, right? And I focused many different ways on a business side. Every morning we have our team huddle. We focus. We on the priorities. You saw in the book I brought you into the Blue Angel briefing room, and you get to see how we go about visualizing and coming up with the game plan. Now, there's different scenarios. We're in a different city every week. We're sometimes over land, sometimes over water. So this idea of adapting that you brought is exactly critical. Yes, we had a game plan, but we always had to adapt it. Weather changes, altitude changes, so you're constantly adapting. But at least we had a plan, and we focused on our roles and our responsibilities. I think that's critical in business. You got to have clarity on roles and responsibilities. You got to know what your standards are. And the reason you need to know standards is so you know when you're out of standards. And then in the debrief, we can talk about that. And so in the book and in the flights, we've got very clear on a briefing and got people aligned. And that's the second step.
Yeah, I think that whole communication bit, the briefing piece is crucial. And to me, this is probably one of the steps that people either overlook or just completely botch, right? And my biggest thing is that a lot of leaders out there or bosses out there don't necessarily communicate to their people in the way that their people understand. Instead, they just do it in the way that makes sense to them. But it goes back to the core principle: know your audience, but communicate to your audience in a way which makes sense to them. And that's what I like about the whole brief thing, right? And you're talking with that. And I think in this section of the book, you had a great example about Russia. Was that this section of the book?
Yeah. I tell a story about, 1992, I took the team to Moscow. Now, this had never before been done. 89 Berlin Wall comes down, a lot of change going on in the world. And we decided on the Blues, we said, let's go to not just Europe. We've been to NATO before. Let's go to Eastern Europe. Let's go to Bulgaria, Romania. Let's go to Moscow. Let's fly against the Russians. Never before been done, right? Took us 3 years. You know how government can be, right? Had to get it through the Department of Defense, State Department, actually the White House. And in 1992, I take the team to Moscow. And I was the operations officer, and we flew the jets over to Finland first. Actually went to Sweden first, then Finland, and we flew in Moscow. It was an incredible experience flying against the Russians. We did exchange rides. It was what I remember was we were welcomed with open arms. I remember flying over the border for the first time in 8 F-18s, landing at Kubinka Air Base, the master jet base right outside of Moscow. And they had all the pomp and circumstance, and the bands were playing, and then we get swarmed by kids. And I got pictures of me holding, the little kids up in their arms. And we flew jets that day. We jumped in. I flew in the Su-27, the MiG-29, and those guys got to fly in the F-18. We had a blast. But it really taught me that, human beings, all of us, we're all more similar than we are dissimilar. And when you connect to the heart, it's amazing what can happen.
No, that was such a great example. And what I really liked about that example in the book, not to take too much out of it, but the flexibility and how you guys had to brainstorm together, and because you almost lost the show.
Yeah. The Russians changed the airspace on us right at the last moment. I mean, I'd done all the prep, and we had gotten the airspace. It was right over Moscow itself, and Moscow's got a beltway, right? Like DC or many other areas. And they had, if you remember, there was a person flew a Cessna and it landed on Red Square. Yeah. And that kind of embarrassed the Russian military. And so they put a lockdown. They had a no-fly zone, which we have a ton now. And so they told us we'd be able to fly in it. And then the day before, they decided to take it away. And, we had to adapt, just like you said. And first thing I tried to do is get clearance. I went all the way through the Russian high command, Mayor Moscow, and, they finally said no. And we had a choice. You either don't fly or you adapt. And we adapted.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a signature mark of all high performing teams, right? When you get into that, go or no go zone due to some kind of change, it's like, oh, we either got to adapt or it's not going to happen. The weak teams, the weak leadership will fold, whereas the high performance and, the strong led teams will adapt, will overcome, and find a way to, in the end, achieve whatever success is for them. So that was awesome. So moving on, we got belief, we got brief. Next is?
Well, the center point. I like to go to the center point next.
Oh, center point. You're throwing me a curveball.
That's in the middle of the diagram, right? Yeah. And I think this is critical because you have to know what you're focused on and get people aligned. So I've noticed in any team, you gotta connect. So there's this physical connection that happens between human beings, right? Mm-hmm. Then you gotta align, and then you gotta commit. So we're on this alignment piece now. I call it the center point. And example I use, well, first off, the center point is really just a decision-making tool. It's the single point of focus we're going to make decisions off of, right? So what we do is when we're flying an air show, we'll put a tractor-trailer truck over land, over a runway, or a boat over water, and that becomes a defined reference point. And then, we map it out. We draw flight lines. We have 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile checkpoints. So we build our business plan every time on a new place. We build it, right? And then you got to transfer that into our own minds. And then you got to fly it, and you got to use the center point allows us to correct. So we'll be coming at each other at over 1,000 miles per hour closure, where I do a mile every 9 seconds, right? Or a mile of closure every 4.5 seconds. And I'm using this center point as an alignment tool, but I use it in business too now.
So how do you go about using it in business?
Yeah, so you could use it in business, you can use it in personal life. The first question I ask right away in these organizations where we do deep leadership training, I say, okay, ask one simple question. What's your center point? And then listen. Ask that of your teammates. Ask that of a customer. It's really important to ask our customer. And listen to what they say. So first thing it does, it gives you some intel. Are you aligned with what they think is important? Because you might not be. We always think we are, but we're not.
Yep.
Might not be. So let's use an example in business as the customer. It's always a good one. Use the customer as the center point. Then that's great. Now what you have to do is you have to align the stack. And the stack is, I show this video of us flying where all 6 jets are going straight up together. Then we go in 6 different directions. And this is individual roles and responsibilities. And you come back and we cross over a point that becomes a center point. And and the whole thing in business. So if the customer is the center point, then what do you need to do? Well, you could go to functional areas. You could say you need sales and marketing and support and operations. All these things need to come together. Or I work a lot in healthcare and we use the patient as the center point. And you got to have quality, safety, patient experience, all these things. And it's both clinical and non-clinical. All these elements have to come together. Once you know what your center point is, that's the key.
It makes sense. We often use the term center of gravity in a more of a military, army context. But I definitely like the center point. And I like that whole idea of asking yourself and as well your people and your customers to making sure that everybody lines up. Because if your values and your beliefs don't line up with theirs, then you're going to have that miscommunication going on, and then all suddenly expectations are not being met because everybody doesn't necessarily have the same expectations.
Exactly.
So
I like you use the core values as a center point. That's another example. Use your core values as a center point and then you line them up. And that ties it in, like you were saying, to the brief, because now you got communication and alignment. And the two is what you need. Great point, Scott.
No, love it. So where do we move from the center point? Probably
well, then I go to execution.
Now we go to execution.
Because you got to execute. I mean, we could spend forever, setting beliefs and planning, but now you got to go out there and do it. So
you got to do the business at some point.
Yeah. I mean, and to me, the key to execution is trust. I think there's lots of levers that you can pull as a leader to increase execution. It could be resources. It could be, many different things. To me, though, if you want to do it quickly, focus on trust. Now, the challenge of that is that trust can mean different things to different people. So what I show in the book is what we use, what I call high trust contracts. And a high trust contract is not a written statement of work or employee engagement contract. Those are important. I get that, right? Okay, you have that. I'm talking about how to execute at a very high level, very fast, with verbal and non-verbal agreements.
Mm-hmm. I always like to look at trust as trust should be guaranteed. Because 99% of the population out there want to do a good job. They want to achieve success. They want to move the organization forward, especially if they believe in it. And too many people are like, oh, you got to earn my trust. And it's like, well, how about you give them the opportunity to go forward? And that's kind of how I felt was coming out of this book, because when you guys are like feet, if not inches from wingtip to wingtip, you got to trust. You got to trust the guy on your left and right is going to do their job to make sure all 2 to 3 to 6 of you don't crash and burn, literally.
Yeah. Well, and I think, trust, it's such a big subject, right? But I think the answer is, for me, it's both, right? I think you got to give trust and then you got to earn trust. And what we did on the team is you earn trust every single day. And small things matter. Right. The way you performed, you had to you're accountable to what you said you're going to do. So yes, we had a game plan, and yes, we had trust agreements, but you had to execute on them. And I think that's the challenge I see in the business world is a lot of people don't realize that the small things matter. If I'm counting on you to be on time, and for me, it was a 3-mile checkpoint. Okay, I want you on airspeed, on altitude, on time. If you're just 1 second off, you're way out of parameters, right? And you don't hide things. Thumper, when we would do our timing pattern, he'd come up on the radio and say, I'm working a little late. Now, first off, he's 6 miles away. We're virtual, like most teams, right? And I'm listening, but he could have hide it. No, it's single seat cockpit. No one's going to know, but no, you don't hide things. You say, look, I'm a little bit late. Why? So we can correct and
Right.
then as the leader, I would correct. I would speed up if he was early. I would slow down if he was late, because we're going to get to where we need to go. So these high trust contracts are very critical. I have what I call the 3 C's of trust. We can get to those in a minute.
I really like that whole adjustment. And my thing is, as a leader, are you getting told the truth, or are you getting told what you want to hear?
Right.
Right? Because I never want to get told what I want to hear. What I want to get told is the truth. And you get told the truth so you can adjust on the fly, literally, for you, mind the pun. Right? So I love that example. So yeah, definitely. Let's dive into those 3 C's of yours.
Yeah, well, I think, and I love the idea of adjustment. You're absolutely right, because we're doing it real time, and we're making 1,000 corrections airborne, and you got to have that real time feedback in order to make that adjustment. And then it gets to that feedback loop we can go to next. But the 3 C's of trust are, I believe, competency is the first one. Then there's commitment, and then I like to end on consistency. The reason I picked these 3 is this: competency. Are you competent? Are you skilled? Do you have the skills to do it? Well, that's basic stuff, okay? But let's make sure that you have that, right? And when you're hiring people, what do we typically do? You spend a lot of time looking at competency. I think that's just the baseline. So you got to get to the second one, and that's commitment, because that's what I really want to know. I want to know, are you committed? Are you 100% in? And that's harder to tell, right, on certain people. And what I've noticed is there's a third one, though, and this is typically, after you hired somebody, you find out, is consistency. And the reason that's so important is I need to know you're going to bring your A game every single day. And when you're flying 36 inches from another jet, you better be very clear that other person understands what they're going to do, but they're going to be consistent, especially in their safety procedures, right? So that's actually where most things break down, is most people break down in the consistency side.
If you think about it, it makes the most sense, though, because to me, the consistency part is the most complex. How do people get up when they fail? How do they ensure that they're continually doing exactly what they need to do? Integrity comes in there. Accountability comes in there. It's just so many factors built in that consistency that it's just intensely complex and diverse, but absolutely crucial. And absolutely crucial across the entire board, whether that is you're flying a supersonic jet like the FA-18, or you're showing up to work as a web developer. Consistency is what's going to drive the organization forward.
Right. And like I said, small things matter. I remember this quote, and I quoted in the book, that it says, be true to the small things, because that's where your strength comes from. Oh, be faithful. Be faithful to your small things, because that's where your strength comes from. And it's not some big business leader or sports coach. It's Mother Teresa quoted that, and it's powerful, right? I mean, I think small things matter, especially in trust and character too. Small things matter in character.
No, for sure. For sure. I think we could keep hammering that trust all evening. So let's go move forward. You said you had one other thing you wanted to hit.
Yeah, the fourth facet, and you led to it, and that is what I like to call the debrief. All right, and that term's out there. Some people understand it, not only in the military, but healthcare is getting that too. But what I've noticed is this is where the gap is in most organizations. Most organizations have a vision. They've got standards. They usually have pretty good communication, or they try to, and they execute as best they can. But the gap is in the debrief, and that's where you learn. That's where continuous improvement comes in. So whenever I get asked, and I get asked all the time to speak on things like, how do you take it to the next level? What's this continuous improvement? How do you get chemistry? How do you get teamwork? How do you get leadership? And to me, the key tool for that is what I call the glad to be here debrief. And as you know, in the book, I take you behind the scenes, and I take you inside our Blue Angel debriefing room and show you how we go about these big concepts. Yeah,
I really like the glad to be here ideology and mentality. That was pretty neat for an outsider to read about, and was like, oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. But one thing that definitely shot out at me in this part of the book was the professional manner in which the debriefs were handled.
Yes.
Right. Can you go into that? Because I think that's really, to me, and the coaching I do and the people I talk to, and you hinted at, this is the part where it kind of falls apart. If it's not communication, it's the debrief part, which is actually a part of communication anyway. It all lumps together in the end. But the ability for people to speak objectively in a professional manner, to do those, talk about where problems arose and figure out, ultimately how they're going to go ahead in the future in fixing those problems.
Exactly. And I think, what I see all the time is that the first problem is people just don't do it, right? They just don't have a cadence of execution that involves the debrief. Or typically we only do it when things go wrong, especially in business. Right? And that's not what I'm talking about, because you're going to get a whole different reaction. If you're only doing this when things go wrong, it becomes fear-based. It's negative bias. It's not, sure, you can find out, like a win-loss review. Okay, well, that's good. But what I want to do is I want to bake this in. And we're doing this in healthcare. Sports teams get it all the time. Sports teams understand this, right? Military gets it. But in the basic business, the debrief is really your most important thing you can focus on. So it's not that you don't have time. You don't have time not to, once you understand the power of this. And you're identifying small things before they become big things. So there's that time issue that's in there. Also, is it standard protocol? Meaning, is it baked into your systems where, of course, we debrief? It's not like we debrief just because something really good or bad happened. No, debrief is part of how we do business, right? And once you do that, I find there's many different types. I call them the three basic ones. There's an event debrief, so something has happened. Maybe you've given a talk, maybe you've launched a product, something like that. There's an event, so it's debrief. There's also your ongoing debriefs, all right? And these are more like Mondays and Fridays. You can build in the cadence when you want to do, quarterly debriefs, these kinds of things. And then there's real-time debriefs. And these are the most important ones. These are the ones you just grab someone, you put your arm around their shoulder, and you have a very quick, dialogue. Or you call up after a conference call and you say, hey, what did we learn from here? So the first thing we got to establish is the structure, right? And what you're talking about, professionalism. What I've noticed is that what we want to do is what I call create the 5 dynamics. And if you want, we can go into those now. Those 5 dynamics I talked about?
Let's dive in.
Okay. So these are critical. I've learned this well over time. The first dynamic that you want to create in order to have an effective, what I call glad to be or debrief, is you need a safe environment. And so what is that? Well, there's psychological safety, there's respect, and that's the key, is it comes from respect. So, just like you said, you want to know the truth. You don't want to just be told what you want to hear, right? So you as a leader get to create these environments. And this doesn't mean just the CEO. I mean, there's teams within teams, right? So you and your little sub team get to create, is there a safe environment where we do talk about things, where we do, quote, lay it on the table? In fact, that's the third one. The second one is what I've noticed. I put them in 5. So first is a safe environment. Second is check your ego at the door. See, what I'm looking for here is humility. I know people are good. I wouldn't hire you. You got to check your ego at the door. This is about the we, not the I. So I don't really care who's right and who's wrong. I just want to know what's better and how we're going to move forward, right? So this idea of you got to lay your rank on the table sometimes. You got to level the playing field and say, hey, let's talk about this thing. Now, the sensitivity about lay the rank on the table, though, is very critical. Is you always have respect. You know who the leader and the boss is and what they are. You never lose that respect. They're the ones who are leveling the table, right? So that's this idea of that. Then I want an open and honest environment. We all do as leaders. So I say, lay it on the table. Let's talk about this. And on the Blue Angels, we actually called it a table. You sat around the table and we debriefed and you just laid it out there. You said, if I made a mistake, here's what it is. And that's the cool part, is once you made a mistake, what you did is you always had an ownership mentality. I call it, I'll fix it. So that you took accountability, not just accountability, you took, more importantly, personal responsibility. And not just for your part, but for the outcome. See, that's what I want. I want ownership. I want the outcome as a leader. And too many people are in silos and they're pointing fingers at somebody else. And that's not what I'm talking about here. And then the key is, and the last and the 5th dynamic is what you mentioned. It's the glad to be here. And that's the secret sauce. Because if you just do the first 4, you'll still get it can become a negative experience over time. But when you add in the glad to be here, it becomes a spiraling up process of high performance, because you connect back to the why, not just the what, and not just the how. It's why you're doing things. And to me, if there's only one message that people take from this podcast, I hope they take the glad to be here, because that's the game changer.
I can tell you're glad to be here to talk to the audience. For those that aren't watching, John's got a whole big grin on his face this whole time. So no, I really like it. I think that is, basically pure genius in the way that you've outlined it, because in the end, like you said, it wraps back to the why. The whole glad to be here thing wraps back to, I am happy to be part of this team, part of this organization, this institution, company, whatever, right? And that kind of wraps it all up and like, okay, in the worst case scenario, we've aired out all the dirty laundry, or in the best case scenario, we've patted everybody else on the back, but we are still here glad for the organization as a whole and us as a team moving forward. So I love that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, and we could do the whole talk on glad to be here because it's that important, but what it's put into the debrief, but I like to show that it's really the ethos of this whole framework, this fearless success system, because what happens is the last arrow in the diagram is that glad to be here. It resets your beliefs. And now you get this spiraling up process of high performance. So this thing accelerates up and it's quick. And you can do it multiple times, and it's Gestalt. And Gestalt's basically the sum is greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So when you do all these things that we just went over, when you start with belief levels, and then you add in the brief, the center point, these trust contracts, and then the debrief, this thing spirals up and it gets hugely powerful.
No, for sure. John, I think we could run into another couple hours of conversation on this and leadership, and there's a whack of flight related questions in my mind as well. But let's start winding this down here. I got a couple last questions for you.
Sure.
What's one or two actual things, tangible things that leaders out there listening to this podcast right now could either do today or tomorrow, and see some immediate results for their teams?
Well, the first thing as a leader, I think you got to look inward. You got to look at yourself. It's the axiom. You point a finger at someone, there's three of them pointing back. So for me, I'm in a constant state of self-assessment, awareness, to the big picture. So you got to open up your radar scope, open up your mind, and then focus down. And that's a skill, knowing how to open up and focus down, open up. And it's a continuous process. It doesn't just stop, right? And I think as a leader, our main goal is to create opportunities. I want to create opportunities for others. Okay. That's why, I'm a leader. That's why I'm a CEO. It's to create the opportunities. Now it's their responsibility to seize them. And I think that's where a lot of people, you can get caught up, right? Because you want people around you who want to seize that opportunity. And I don't care if it's in business or if it's in personal, let's seize the opportunity, right? And then I think that the last thing that I would share, because I want to keep this simple, and you're right, there's power in simplicity, is rejoice, celebrate. It's the thing that is the most powerful, because when you rejoice on the good things and you celebrate your people and you keep this appreciation, this positive mindset out there, that's what accelerates all these other things. And it's too easy to get sucked into the day-to-day stuff and be in a downward spiral. So, I would say look inward first, have that self-awareness. Two is create some opportunities, and then celebrate your victories.
No, I love it. I love it all. I don't need to add anything to those whatsoever. All right, one last question I ask all my guests before we close up here, John, and that is to you, John Foley. What makes a great leader?
Well, I think we kind of went through some of those, but I think a great leader is someone who is self-aware, they're humble, they're very confident now. It's different from ego. I think confidence. Yep. And I think that a great leader sees things that others don't see and has the confidence to take the action. See, that to me is what sustained innovation is. When you see things others don't see, and then you also have the confidence to take the action. It requires two big skills here. One is the awareness piece, and the second is the action piece, the confidence. And that to me is a great leader.
That's awesome. Well, this is part of the show where I flip the mic over. Not that you didn't have the mic anyway, but feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. Where can people find the book? Where can they follow you? All that good jazz.
Oh, yeah. So first off, it took me 10 years to write this book in 4 different manuscripts, right? So I'm actually very excited this one's out. It only hit last month. It's everywhere, right? I mean, it's Amazon, it's Barnes and Nobles, it's at all the airports. But I would say if you want a special, we go to my website and we bundled in another content piece called Breaking Belief Barriers. It gets into more of the beliefs, right? So our website is John Foley Inc., JohnFoleyinc.com. Go to the store. We've got a banner on there now, and you can get this bundled package, by the way, for the same price as what you would pay for the book out in the other sources. So, yeah, go there. There you also see there's a lot of other content that we have. I've got a debrief book, the Glad to Be Here Debrief. I do speak to organizations around the world, so we've got all kinds of videos. And be in touch with us. Social media, we're all over the place. Whether it's LinkedIn, John Foley Inc. You got Instagram, Facebook, all kinds of stuff. So I just want to be a support to many people, and my goal is to inspire 1 billion people. So we need a lot of people out there wearing these Glad to Be Here stickers and Glad to Be Here shirts.
That's awesome. For the audience, as always, it's easy for you guys. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/8282. And all those links that were mentioned just now will be in there in the show notes. John, it's been awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the copy of the book. Thank you for your service in the U.S. Navy. I served with you guys. My wife served with the U.S. Navy in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Great crew. F-18 screaming overhead. Air Force F-16 screaming overhead. And definitely can thank you guys for some things if you catch my drift. So thanks for your time. And most importantly, though, thanks for coming out and talking to the audience.
Glad to be here, Scott. Thank you.
Wasn't that incredible? Did you not take away a ton of information from this, relatively short episode? I know I took a lot from not only just the interview, but the book as well. So if you're interested in the book, it behooves you to go to movingforwardleadership.com/82. And right there in the show notes, you will find the link for the book. All right. And yes, that link will be an affiliate link, which will in turn support me with the podcast and the website. Full disclosure, that's one of the reasons why I put the links in there. But as well, the main reason I put the links there is to help you. It's a resource. It's a spot where those resources will be. And in the end, you know what? I get a little money onto the side for you doing that. And it helps me turn around and reinvest in moving forward leadership. Why? To help you. That is it. Anyway, that's just a disclaimer, full disclosure. It's not a cry or anything like that to use my affiliate links. Just letting you guys know how this stuff works in the background if you weren't cognizant of it before. Anyway, if you truly enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed this interview with John Foley, remember, R²S². Rate and review the show so that I can help more people out there stop being bosses and become better leaders. Because that's why I'm here, folks. That is the only reason why I do this show. To help you become a better leader and help others stop being bosses. S, if you know someone who would be interested in this show, then share it. Share it with them. You simply just share the show notes and let them know, hey, check out this amazing episode with a former fighter pilot talking about high performance teams and leadership. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode if you missed the episode. And you can do that simply by going to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this week. We'll see you on Monday when I drop my next Monday Leadership Minute. But as always, stop bossing, start leading. Take care now.